everyone, and welcome to today's Meet the Analyst webinar, Post-Purchase Omnichannel Experience. On theme with today's topic, our audience is joining us through many channels, Brand Live, LinkedIn Live, and Twitter. But no matter how you're viewing or joining us, we're really glad you decided to attend today. I'm your host, Jillian Ryan, eMarketer Principal Analyst at Insider Intelligence, and I'm broadcasting from my Astoria, New York apartment today. I'm also joined by my colleague and today's presenter, fellow Principal Analyst, Jeremy Goldman, who is broadcasting live from our 11 Times Square headquarters. Jeremy, great to have you here.
Great to be with you.
Awesome. Now, before I give the reins to Jeremy, I'd also like to take a moment to thank Emarsys for making today's webinar possible. We'll be hearing later on from Alex Timlin, who's the SVP of Verticals at Emarsys. Hey, Alex, thanks for joining us all the way from London.
Thanks, great to be here. Looking forward to it.
So just a few housekeeping things. As with any Meet the Analyst presentation, there's going to be a lot of data, a lot of insights, best practices for you to implement in your work as marketers. You can take notes, but you don't have to. We'll be emailing you a link to view the slides and the full recording in a few days. But we also want you to participate. That's something that we encourage, please, during the presentation. You could use the window on the lower right-hand side of your screen and submit questions at any time during Jeremy's presentation and during the Q&A. I'll be monitoring that chat and making sure to surface some of the best questions to Jeremy and Alex as we're chatting later on. Now, if your colleagues haven't registered and they know that they're going to miss out on these great insights, it's not too late. Just ping them the link that you used to register and they could hop on in. So yeah, that's it for that pesky housekeeping. Jeremy, as I've been alluding to, you have some insights to share. So let's get started. What is on the agenda for today?
Yeah, so it's going to be a packed agenda. I'm really excited to be presenting to everybody. We're going to be covering a number of different topics, all tied to the idea of post-purchase customer care, as well as customer experience in general. You know, the mindset of today's customer, where are they at right now? How about a single customer view? What does that actually mean? And then servicing our customers through messaging channels, as well as chatbots and conversational AI. And then finally, you know, evolving service touch points. There are a few that are new, including some innovation in service that's important for us to be thinking about. So I really want us to jump right in. And first, you know, talk about why improving post-purchase customer care. Why is it so important? And if we look at the data, we see that customer satisfaction is a critical measure that can be improved. And one reason why people constantly invest in this area. Customer retention also. And it's never been easier than now, unfortunately, for a customer to leave you for a competitor's offering. That's why it's important to think about how really improved customer care does a lot of things for you. It leads to greater customer satisfaction. Most people believe that, which obviously increases positive word of mouth and lowers customer acquisition costs and more profits as a result. And then you can have an improved product offering when you can invest in it. So there are a lot of really good reasons to be focused on this area. Now, first off, in terms of understanding today's consumer, I think it's interesting to note and important to note that 2/3 of customers would rather have an empathetic customer service experience as opposed to a speedier resolution. That's not necessarily something that most companies are thinking about right now, nor are they thinking about the fact that you know, people are interacting a lot on digital channels, but a lot of people don't feel socially connected to one another as a result of the pandemic. And you can see some data here that speaks to that. The people who are connected deficient, essentially, 42% of customers, 64% say that their happiness decreased, 58% said their mental health decreased, and 59% said that their anxiety increased. Now, for the connected, a number of things were going right in their lives, including their happiness increasing, their mental health was improving, but their anxiety was still going up. And just really to understand what your customer's mentality is right now, is critical. Also critical to think about the fact that the pandemic has affected people adversely. You can see here a lot of people are price sensitive right now, and that's the type of mindset that they go into with any customer service interaction. I even had an experience like that last night that maybe we'll get a question in the Q&A that I can tell you about. And then industry expectations, they really do vary. Financial institutions as an industry, they deliver the best customer service according to one study. But still, a lot of people feel that on the whole, that industry doesn't provide perfect service. And you can see here, these are some of the best industries in terms of the marks that they get on the whole for their customer service. So there's a lot of opportunities to improve in that regard. In terms of the single customer view, customer service agents, they're often hobbled and not able to do their job in part because somebody else didn't give them access to data that they needed. If you look here, the types of customer data that customer service agents are able to access to across all systems, and 49% are able to get personal details. That's not even half. And that's the most basic information. And as you can see, as you go down, there are more and more pieces that are ultimately missing. So you can't really make people happy in that regard.
Jeremy, I want to interrupt you here because something that's really interesting to me on this chart is like the personal details. Like, yes, a customer service agent should know your name, but I don't need them to know my birth date. Rather, the stuff that's on the bottom, like the plan or subscription that I'm on, the product or service I purchased, the items that are ranked lower in this survey that are more important than my birth date, just aren't being taken into account. So I think that's really surprising that these like personal details are done by 50%. And some of these really important, just customer behavioral information, just really not taken into account. That's a good point. Yeah. Hobbling.
In I think in a lot of ways, organizations, and I might have some extra data on this a little later on, might even be actually, it's not next, but I'll keep going, but I might actually have another data point that speaks to that very issue. Now, one thing that, when we talk about this seamless view of the customer across, every single touch point, less than 1 in 10 client-side companies say that they provide a seamless experience across all touch points. And I applaud them for their honesty because that seems about right. You often have a situation where a company gets very close, but then is missing a few key points like Jillian just mentioned. And this is even a bigger issue when you realize that this is what the customer is focused on. It's the #1 attribute that makes customer service exceptional, according to a Gladly study that you can see here. 46% of US internet users said that this was the thing that made service exceptional. It was by far the most popular answer in that study. And this is the thing that I was mentioning to Jillian before, actually. Less than half of customer service professionals have a complete and accessible view of interactions across departments. That's that 49% figure that you see here. And even in certain departments, to have access to sales, 71%, to have access to marketing, 65%. But in terms of having access to everything, less than half. And that's a big point that a lot of organizations can improve on, and also adding unnecessary friction to the post-purchase experience. Show of hands out there, and you can just raise your hands in your offices or on your couch. How many people have ever been transferred multiple times when they're trying to solve a customer service issue, right? It's a major problem. And if you look to see the ways in which companies are addressing things, they're often now trying to address problems like that and reduce friction, ironically, by adding more support channels. And sometimes that's a good thing, as you see here. The way in which service is being provided, it's dramatically shifting. Obviously, in person was down a lot last year. Nobody's surprised by that. But when you're seeing things like online chat and live support go up, messenger apps go up, video support go up dramatically, realistically, do we expect that new normal to go back to the way it was? Probably not. Are you going to expect a 42% growth for video support 2 years from now? I would say probably not as well. But in terms of having growth in these areas, you should definitely expect that. Another thing to keep in mind here is that consumers are waking up to the fact that their data is valuable. Your customers see their data as valuable, and because of that, they often want something in return. And unless you're going to Venmo them a few dollars, then you often need to personalize. A lot of retailers that are succeeding to some extent through the pandemic are realizing that providing better customer care through personalization, that's probably a way to win the hearts and minds of that customer and keep them loyal. More affluent customers especially appreciate this personalization. Ones making over 188,000 a year say they feel more loyalty to a brand that offers that type of personalization, and also personalization by generational cohort to treat different cohorts differently based off of their needs. We talked a little bit before about sensitivity to price. And right now, millennials were the most price sensitive in a recent study, being hit pretty dramatically by the pandemic. Now, I want to talk about service via messaging channels and why that's so critical to the future. And I'm really talking about messaging in a broad sense because B2C messaging here, this particular study is talking about text messaging. There are a lot of service applications for text messaging. Often people are getting marketing texts, but if you look at the most popular reasons for using text, they're often service applications like scheduling and reminders, general support, alert of an account past due, things like that. And increasingly, there's data to suggest that customers are getting used to these texts and they're okay with receiving them. Now, in terms of why brands are gravitating to these things, ultimately, they've been shown to improve loyalty and LTV. And these are at least the perceptions around it. There's some data to suggest that that's actually correct. And these are some things that are in short supply right now. If you can find a way to increase customer loyalty, then obviously messaging your customers and having those interactions is a great way of doing it. Here you can see I pulled a few examples because you can see, obviously, there are a lot of different use cases for having that type of conversation. You can get people to rate your business in some regard. You can let people know that something has been shipped. You can have a one-on-one dialogue with a customer, which in some ways is more efficient, right? So a lot of different potential applications in this regard that you can judge yourself against. Now, I mentioned before that customers are getting increasingly familiar with texting. That's true also of messaging, through social messaging apps. This is some data that is international, has some US baked into it. And Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp, you see, lead the way in terms of ways in which people are using these social messaging apps to speak to brands. And generally, what we're finding is that people are getting more comfortable with text messaging as well as social messaging, that they're pretty much going hand in hand in terms of what the data shows.
And Jeremy, what's really interesting there too that I would highlight is that only 30% of consumers say that they don't use that type of platform. So it's a 70% adoption rate, although it is kind of scattered across many different types of social media messaging apps. But that's still a pretty high adoption rate in terms of consumers really, using this to talk to customer support. That's a great learning.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're expecting, because obviously not everybody has done it yet, so you'll see that, let's say, that none, we would imagine that will go down over the next few years. But then how about the frequency of it, right? What percentage? I would imagine that a lot of people are still using the phone or using email or using some legacy means to talk to brands. But the total volume of things that are going to be addressed through text and social messaging will only go up in the years to come.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of why people are gravitating to this experience, this is really interesting. Nearly 3 in 4 internet users worldwide, they rate texting with customer service as good or excellent. And considering the fact this is a relatively new technology, you would expect that number that's to actually go up and to improve, because the technology and the support that's there on the market just keeps on getting better to provide a better experience for customers. I can say that even the experience that I went through last night, just dealing with a brand directly through a social messaging app was a lot faster of a resolution than being on hold for 14 minutes to talk to somebody for 14 minutes. So now RCS is really the future of SMS, or what we know of as text messaging. And in short, one of the things that's really interesting about RCS is that you have a little bit more of a robust interaction between a brand or a retailer or any type of organization and their customers. And that's ultimately what I would say, we, meaning you, are looking for, right? The ability to add some branding and colors and to be able to send people a map of a retailer that's carrying a particular SKU, the ability to have some quick replies baked in to an experience so that it's much more conversational. And here you can see a few particular implementations and use cases. The ability to order pizza quickly, or to figure out what movies are playing near you, or to even board a flight and to add some additional items to your purchase in an airport. All of these things are possible with RCS, and that's why we're going to expect more adoption over the next few years. One of the challenges, we don't really have much time to talk about the technical hurdles to RCS, but in short, many businesses are only now becoming aware of the fact that RCS exists. If you look at 61% of US businesses, they're not familiar with RCS messaging. I would imagine after this webinar, that number will creep down a little bit, but ultimately, there's a lot of opportunity for familiarity to start showing up in the market, and for increased adoption on the market as well. Now, we talked a little bit about conversations, and service via chatbots and conversational AI is also expected to be on the rise over the next few years for a number of reasons. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is the fact that certain industries have done a really good job of leaning into chatbots and conversational AI. And I'll point out one in particular is banking. Chat penetration in terms of getting answers to things very quickly through live chat or within an app or through a desktop experience, that will reach almost 40% of the population of the US by 2024. That's going to be half of US digital banking users are going to gravitate towards this type of experience. And there are some people who think that the U.S. is the first in all adoption. It's far from the case. If you look at some other markets, you can see it's far from a U.S. phenomenon. In part, just looking at some of this data, proves it out. In the UK, 61% of digital banking users are going to be using chatbots by 2024. This is going to have penetration of 66% by 2023 in Canada. So, just looking across a number of different markets, you can see that people are getting a lot more comfortable with this type of experience, that type of engagement that can be made up of a texting conversation, or live chat conversation with a human, or one with an AI, or an AI that then transitions over to a human for a more complex query. Now, in 2020, just a year ago, I thought this was a really interesting statistic. 1 in 2, 50% of US internet users preferred to resolve issues on their own when digitally shopping. I know I'm one of them. 1 year later, that had jumped to 60%. And I think that there are a lot of reasons for that, but in part, a number of different people were just forced to answer questions for themselves, right? When they were engaging online. And there's the proficiency there among your customers to solve problems themselves.
And I think, Jeremy, this really hits on some of that research that you shared in the first section of your deck, talking about the connected versus unconnected consumer and all of the emotions and the feelings that people who are your customers are just experiencing because of some of the crisis that we've been experiencing this year. So it makes sense that users want to self-service. And to your point, a chatbot is a way to kind of enter them into that experience. And if and when it's more complicated, then that's when you bring that real customer service representative in there. But the important part is that that customer service representative knows all that historical data of what's already been discussed, so the person doesn't have to repeat themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, the smarter providers out there are realizing this, right? That it has to be a frictionless experience when you have that type of handoff, or when somebody does need a little bit more care. Absolutely. Um, Actually, and just a little bit more data on this for those who are less familiar with the space. There is some data to suggest that nearly 40% of internet users prefer interacting with a chatbot than a virtual agent. If you have a relatively well set up chatbot, they'll be comfortable with interacting with it. And the CMO Council has found that nearly 81% of marketing leaders consider chatbot sessions to be in a very effective way of connecting with customers. That was the most effective, basically way to be reaching out with customers, according to that study. And there's a lot of investment that's happening in this area. So generally speaking, people don't invest a lot of money if they don't believe that there is going to be an ROI. And they've done some tests and seem to indicate that this is something that people are gravitating to. And another example is, I know we talked about this, we call it post-purchase customer care. The reality is that customer care happens at all different stages of the customer journey. Digital onboarding is incredibly important, and this is one example. The firm Lemonade, they added a chatbot, Maya, that basically uses natural language processing in order to onboard customers to the platform. So you have to go through this experience, so you might say it adds friction, but actually, no, it onboards people a lot faster in as little as 90 seconds compared with 10 minutes for traditional insurers. So this is one way that you can actually insert a chatbot into multiple stages of the process to better support the customer. And then want to talk a little bit about some evolving service touchpoints, certain things that we're all familiar with to some extent that are shifting a little bit, in part because of the pandemic, and in part because of there's just digital acceleration in general, frankly. Marketers have to start adapting to the fragmentation of experience. And by that, I just mean the fact that let's take click and collect, actually, for example. You basically have the general idea right now of people who are purchasing in store, and this was years ago. But then after a while, people started buying via e-commerce, and then people started doing pickup, click and collect. But then they started doing pickup, via in-store or lockers or curbside. So there are all these different experiences that you have to provide a positive experience to the customer. And that's happening in the returns process as well. It's happening in a number of different ways. Now, in terms of click and collect, perfect example of an area where you can improve upon the experience if you're a retailer that offers this. For instance, in-store product availability, that's been cited as an issue. The availability of preferred pickup times, or to be able to filter inventory to find things that you can pick up yourself, as opposed to having to go into a store. These are all things that are opportunities for organizations that offer that type of experience. So a lot of opportunities out there. Returns are frankly another big area, especially because there's more migration towards e-commerce. And generally speaking, you see return rates of as much as 300% higher when it comes to e-commerce versus brick and mortar. So there are just more returns out there, as you can see. And now you have organizations seeing it to be a major pain point. A survey that I looked at said that 15% of large retailers a year ago thought that returns were a major concern. It jumped to 50%, in part because of the pandemic and all those other numbers of returns that are eating into margins. And then loyalty is really up for grabs as a result. If you look to see the data indicates that people were a lot less loyal during the pandemic. Loyalty was up for grabs. A lot of people say that these new brands that they've been shopping with, they're going to stay loyal to after the pandemic in some way. And as to why, a lot of these organizations had better return policies, or they were clearer about their return policies, or their communications were better around orders and returns. And this is a major phenomenon to pay attention to. I think another one in this area to pay attention to is bracketing, which impacts a few industries quite a lot, and some not at all. But in terms of buying three things, in three different sizes, and then trying them all on, and then sending them back, that eats up margin for retailers, and that's something as people are using their homes as places where they can try things on and then just shipping them back. And especially as return policies are very permissive, this is something that's on the rise. It went up a lot because of the pandemic, and then the data shows that it stayed above the levels that it was before. And in terms of being able to provide really good service, one thing that's really important to note is that 29% said that they only bracket when sizing or other options aren't clear. So simply providing the experience of having more information on a product detail page can alleviate calls or chatbot inquiries to your customer service team. Now, innovation and service, I want to show you a few interesting ways that you can start to think about how you can better serve your customers. And some of this is post-purchase, some of this is discovery. One interesting example here is Cull's AR virtual closet on Snapchat that I found to be a nice, interesting, basic implementation. Cull's wanted to try to get younger. Snapchat skews a little bit younger, and the feature allows them to find products they like and make purchases without even leaving the app. So one interesting implementation. Another one, let's see if I can get this. Ulta Beauty pivoted to this AR tool that offers more than 4,000 items and offers a substitute for in-store tester units, which was something that for those of you who haven't worked in the beauty industry, like me, I can tell you is a huge thing. Having tester units where people are actually all using the same product and applying it to their face in store. And you can imagine that even not in a pandemic, that's not necessarily the most hygienic thing to do. So that's something that we expect a lot more people to get comfortable with these types of experiences and gravitate towards them in terms of figuring out which shades are going to be right for them. And you'll see that it's not just with shades, it's also with sunglasses or eyewear in general, which I guess is shades now that I think about it. The ultimate idea of virtual try-on is something that Warby Parker, they implemented this years ago, but actually it saw a major uptick in terms of usage because of the pandemic. And their numbers in terms of how many people are using this have stayed relatively high, despite the fact that people are going back in stores. So this is one of those experiences that we think that there are a lot of potential opportunities in terms of better servicing your customers. Now, this is another interesting implementation by Cadillac. This is a one-on-one or group experience video tour where you can take any Cadillac vehicle and have questions answered. But it's also great because of the fact that the discovery and consideration phase can move a lot faster. So very important thing to note. Now, a few things I'd love for you to take away from our brief time together today. First off, it all starts at the end. Okay, post-purchase customer experience is one of those things that's critical because it leads to better word of mouth, lower acquisition costs, and ROI. And that's really what most organizations that we speak to are ultimately interested in. It's pivotal to understand the customer and where they're at. If you can invest in developing a single view of the customer as much as possible, that will put you in a better mindset in terms of being able to service them and understand their needs and solve problems for them. It's pivotal to master new channels as well. If you have Text messaging implemented, great. Consider chatbots. Likewise, consider AR experiences, things that you haven't tried, but you know that the market at large is getting a positive ROI on, are worth exploring. And I mentioned about AR a second ago. Innovation around the post-purchase experience, as well as just the service model in general. Remote video has done well, AR has done well. Ways to innovate and serve ultimately are paying huge dividends because they're a way to set your brand apart from other brands in your competitive sphere. So another important thing to consider. Yeah, back to you, Jillian.
That was awesome, Jeremy. And I am definitely going to inquire about your customer service experience, either in this webinar or after. I want to hear the details. This is just a friendly reminder to our audience. Jeremy, I know, just shared a ton, but please submit your questions. We have a few that have come in already, but we'd love a few more of them if possible. And now I'm really excited to bring Alex Timlin back in from Emarsys. As I said before, he is the SVP of Verticals, and he and I are going to have a little bit of a fireside chat here to dig a little bit deeper into some of the things and the trends that Jeremy had mentioned. So Alex, thanks again for joining us.
Great session, and the research that goes with it is super insightful. So thanks, Jeremy, not just for this, but all the hard work that went into getting the insights.
Awesome. So Jeremy spent a lot of time talking about data and all of the data that marketers, retailers have on their customers and how some of it isn't stitched together across various systems. So I'd love to ask you what you're seeing with Emarsys clients, what you're seeing with retailers in general, in making sure that they can obtain that complete 360 single view of a customer. How is that going?
I think from our perspective, it's going pretty good, luckily. But I think from some recent reports from Forrester and Gartner, so Emarsys are very much in the customer engagement space. And one of the things we kind of hung our hat on was making a pivot 7 years ago to say, look, we need to make sure that we focus on the customer data first and then the channels of engagement second. And what we are seeing now is more and more clients looking at how do I actually bring these different signals across my business from online sales, offline sales, but more importantly, the data that comes with it about their sentiment. So things like reviews, things like service interactions, and things like their searching behavior to just build a better profile of whether this is a new customer, a returning customer, a happy customer, or a loyal customer, or someone that hasn't necessarily had the best experience and there's an opportunity to improve it. And I think one of the things that we are seeing our customers do really well right now is acting on the data they already have a little bit more effectively by bringing it into one place. And the average Emarsys client's actually working with us across 7 different direct-to-customer channels or digital channels of engagement and is looking at 6 more. So I think this emerging channels conversation that Jeremy picked up on is a really important one. And I think for people on this call who are struggling with how do I communicate with my customers across channels, should start with, first of all, how do I bring the data from those channels into one place to just better understand what are the opportunities to improve the experience for a customer and drive repeat purchases and higher lifetime values?
Yeah, Alex, I love that you mentioned, making it actionable, because who cares if it's all in one place if you're not going to actually use it to inform some sort of segmentation or personalization to better the experience. I love that you talked about some of the channels that you're working on. I'd love to dig a little bit deeper there to better understand which channels retailers should be investing into as they think about creating that personalized experience. I know Jeremy mentioned a couple, but feel free to reiterate on some he mentioned or bring some completely new ones to the table.
I think there's been a resurgence in mobile app marketing. I think a lot of the changes to Apple's iOS put people off some of the things around data and privacy, but also the changes reflected by Google are about, okay, it's now more difficult than ever to kind of track people on a website and to look at permission and how to get that data. And we are seeing a lot of e-commerce brands and retailers really embrace mobile apps because of 2 reasons. 1, it's a better and more direct relationship with that customer and that data. And 2, last year we saw a 62% increase in the US of people doing their end-to-end journey from discovery through to purchase on a mobile application, not a mobile device, but a mobile application. So brands who are finding it hard to personalize and finding it hard to bring their data into one place could do best in investing in how they provide a better experience for their mobile customers and taking another look at mobile apps rather than just mobile web, That's the number one area of growth we're seeing. Second to that is an explosion in push communications, both through apps and also through browser. So we're seeing email growth being one of the biggest growth drivers for most businesses. But in terms of communication channels, WhatsApp and push communications are being hugely on the rise, and mobile app marketing becoming a necessity as people spend more and more time on apps and less time on mobile web.
Yeah. And then, of course, the next question is doing all of that in concert, but we'll leave that off the table for now, because I wanted to jump into loyalty. So quoting the presentation from Jeremy, loyalty is up for grabs. So with that, I just have a very simple question for you, which is, how important is loyalty?
I think it's fundamental to every business, but I think it's the approach to loyalty for a lot of businesses has been really about rewarding people for what they've done rather than incentivizing people for what you want them to do. And I think this whole looking at different sources and different interactions, it's the clients that we have that are really embracing a new approach to loyalty. So we're lucky enough to work with some of the VF Corp brands. We're working with Lenovo. We're working with some really, really large brands that are actually saying, look, I don't just need to reward people for purchases. I need to reward people for interactions, and I need to start fostering an engagement with a customer, not just a purchase with a customer. So I think when it comes to loyalty, it's about recognizing that customers want more than just the product from the brand. They want to have an experience. And if you're really focused on driving loyalty, then whether it's a formal loyalty program or just an approach to traditional CRM principles and driving lifetime value, what you need to look for is, what do you want as a business? More customers buying more often at higher values and lower costs, with what does the customer want from you, which is more value and less friction. So the more you can do to actually look at how to give the customer what they want and tie that back to reward and incentive to help you get what you want out of it, then we are seeing a lot of people starting to reward people for things like community. I think H&M's new loyalty program is rewarding people for trading in clothes and looking at a more of a circular economy and fashion. There's lots of amazing examples of brands looking at, how do I engage with a customer over and above just giving you a couple of points for a purchase, that I think a lot of people on this call could hopefully learn about how they take that back into their own businesses.
Yeah. And to your point, the customers that the marketers that do everything you just said are the ones that are going to be able to grab some of that loyalty that Jeremy was talking about. I wanted to ask a little bit about some new research that Emarsys recently put out in the market around best practices for soliciting customer reviews. I know in our prep, you mentioned some interesting data of what you've seen. So I'd love if you could share that a little bit. And then if you have any tips on what everyone in our audience can do in terms of trying to get customers to give reviews and share their feedback on products that are purchased.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a really interesting use case that's going to be kind of explored a little bit more at the Emarsys Retail Revival Conference coming up in June. We've got clients talking about how it's worked, but the use case was quite simple, which is we were looking at in-store customers, and one of the byproducts of the pandemic was a shift towards Apple Pay and digital payments, which meant that cash was changing less hands, but also there was less paper receipts happening for a lot of our clients, particularly in fashion, jewelry, and electricals. And what that digital receipt allowed you to do was to identify a customer who was purchasing in store. And it's a simple use case we've implemented inside the platform for what's now more than 1,500 retail customers for Emarsys globally, where they have the ability for an in-store purchase or an online purchase to ask the customer to leave a review of the store, not just of the website. So we're asking people, how do they rate the store, the experience in the store, and the experience with the staff, and linking that back directly to Google Maps. From a single use case and a single review, you can get anywhere up to 1,000 views from one review. So we're seeing a simple use case of gathering customer feedback from customers through one very, very simple use case, post-purchase, leave us a review on Google, leading to 1,000 eyeballs on each and every review. And that kind of scale is difficult to get, and not everyone's going to leave a review. I know a lot of people are nervous about what happens if I get a bad review, but if you get a bad review and actually leave a comment publicly addressing that, you are more likely to get repeat purchases than having no commentary at all. And I think that's what we're going to explore in the research is there's no such thing as bad feedback in the world of e-commerce and retail especially. And if you're actually soliciting feedback and acting on it, the customer is statistically more likely to buy from you again than a customer who leaves no feedback at all. And
Yeah.
that's some great research we've done with Zendesk and also with the wider SAP community as well, where we think there's a huge opportunity for brands to not just ask for, but act on feedback that will lead into more repeat purchases and an amplification of their demand generation and acquisition efforts through that positive feedback being publicly available.
Yeah, no, that's great, Alex. And I love how it all ties back to service post-purchase, to your point, taking that feedback, doing something with it. I have one question for you, and I'm actually going to change it into rapid fire so we can move on to Q&A. We've gotten some good questions. So, Jeremy mentioned a lot of trends. Is there any that he didn't mention that you're seeing really pop in the retail industry right now?
I think we're seeing more and more people switch their digital advertising budgets into retention efforts to look more seriously at how do I drive repeat purchase from customers. I think there's a lot of traffic out there. There's been an explosion in e-commerce growth, and a lot of people are now looking at how do I turn that single sale into a repeat sale. And I think that's the biggest and most exciting trend we can look at right now is how do I get customers to keep buying from me, not just how do I get a new customer.
Yeah. And all that goes back to, increasing lifetime value. You don't always have to create new. You could sometimes lean on what you already have. So such a good point. All right. Inviting Jeremy back in for our audience questions. And we have several that we could jump to. So the first one actually comes from Missy, who's from New York. And she is asking about challenges for using AR post-purchase. This is a great question. Jeremy, you had a few examples here. And she says, do you have any examples for companies using See What I See for live customer or tech support?
There are actually a few interesting examples in this space. And one thing that we've seen is that computer manufacturers, they can actually, and generally speaking, this is implemented for more technical products. So computer manufacturers can see a serial, they can see other parts of a computer. So when setup is being done incorrectly, there's an overlay that essentially assists the user, and you can use augmented reality in that way, where the customer support individual is actually writing on the screen in real time to say, well, you need to plug so and so in this spot over here. There are other interesting examples. One thing is automotive technology is getting a lot more complicated. So Mercedes actually implemented a solution where there's an augmented reality overlay within the car. So when you're having problems, you can help yourself, or you can call support and they can see what you're looking at while you're looking at this overlay. So it's actually a lot of really interesting innovation happening in that regard.
Yeah, it's great. Alex, do you have anything to add? And if not, we have plenty of questions. So I can continue
one
going.
of the more interesting examples is from Charlotte Tilbury, a beauty company who's actually really embraced augmented reality with their offline presence being closed. And it's how do I drive repeat business by looking at what else goes with the product I've just bought. So in beauty and in cosmetics, the likelihood of someone just buying one product from you never again is very slow. You're doing a bad job if that happens. But what we are seeing them is looking at different tools like augmented reality to say, how can I actually look at different styles, different looks for the customer in their home, and then connect them with a beauty associate if they've got questions. So I think that blend of augmented reality where you can try on clothes, try on looks, and try on new skins, whatever else it's going to be, but having the ability to, as Jeremy said, speak to an agent or speak to an assistant or speak to an expert when you have questions and create a little bit more of a seamless experience is where we're seeing the lines blur and the most success come.
Yeah, and it's about meeting the customer where they are, and most of us are still at home. So that means you have to figure out how to use technology to service them there. So two great examples. Thank you both. The next question comes from Edgar in DC, and both Jeremy and Alex, we talked about customer data. We talked about unifying it, making it actionable, to Alex's point. And as Edgar says, it does seem like centralizing customer data is a major need, but what are some of the organizational issues businesses run into in that regard?
Alex, you want to start with this one?
Yeah, sure. I think the first one is a misunderstanding of technical competence. I think people don't have a problem with data and data silos. They have a problem with who's allowed to have access to data and where data is allowed to be accessed. So I think one of the biggest things we're seeing right now is some of those silos breaking down, where there's actually just organizationally a willingness to say, okay, I have all this information in a data lake, a data warehouse, or an event streaming service, or whatever nerdy acronym they've invented, to just looking at how do I get data to where it needs to be, rather than just how do I have a giant warehouse that holds all of my data, but no one can use it. So I think being willing and being able to look at how to get data from one place to another is organizationally the thing that people can do best, to make sure that it's not one department's responsibility for customer data, but it's looking at organizationally, how do I have a responsibility to make it available to the people who need it in the places that they need it, just to make sure that we're not building one super system or super silo, but we're looking at how do I siphon data off from where it is to where I need it to be to provide a better experience to the customer and ideally the business user as well.
I would say that there's an issue here with respect to budgets. Who owns the budget to make something like this happen? Who's ultimately responsible from a personnel standpoint for making something like this, like initiating this type of project? I've spoken to, I interview a lot of customer experience officers, some of which who don't have personnel or budget in order to make things happen, really. So it's all about consensus building and getting people on board and figuring out, do you have the power to affect the change that you know is going to ultimately benefit the customer? So I think that in some ways that leads to decision paralysis or moving a little bit slower than some companies would like.
Yeah, and I'll add, you go, Alex.
Just going to say that the one thing I would say, if anyone finds themselves in that position of saying it's hard for me to get budget to make this change that I'm looking for, don't look at the cost, look at the reward. And I think one of the biggest things that we do with anyone when we're moving into an engagement is to understand what's the business value of what we're going to do. And if it's about saving hours, saving time, making the lives of the users easier, either the business users or the end users for a customer, that's generally not what's going to motivate your CFO or your CEO. What they're going to be motivated by is how am I going to drive repeat sales? How am I going to reduce acquisition costs? How am I going to better achieve my growth targets or customer targets by impacting this change? And I think particularly in the service world, because there's been so much pressure to reduce costs, going back to your boss to look at how you can be a growth driver and an enabler of growth by using this customer data is something that will definitely make their ears prick up and make you make that business case and get that autonomy and authority to be part of the decision, if not to make the decision, that little bit easier.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was just going to add my own little answer, which is just kind of like internal transparency on what systems and what data even exists, and making sure that there's alignment and understanding and transparency there, because there might be great data sitting somewhere and people in one department don't even know about it. So that's just the first step sometimes too. For the next question, I'm going to combine two. We have two questions about RCS. One comes from Bonnie in Austin, who's specifically asking about the technical hurdles to RCS adoption, something Jeremy alluded to. And then we have another question, and this one is from Sarma AR from India, who is asking about RCS specifically for travel. So if we could talk about technical hurdles, and then if either of you have a travel example you want to share, there's a lot of questions there, so answer what you can.
Sure. There's a lot there. In short, the technical hurdles are coming down, every day. Google has gotten on board and has essentially its flavor of RCS that most devices is able to support. So as I started researching this topic last year, Google wasn't nearly where they are right now. So they moved pretty dramatically. In terms of the US, ironically, one of the biggest hurdles is, we were talking about Apple before, and Apple has iMessage, which isn't quite RCS, but does allow more robust experiences to an extent. And they haven't come out and said that, yes, they're going to support this standard. There is a lot more RCS availability in devices outside of the States than there is inside. Of course, that's a broad generalization, but we're expecting those barriers to go down. And for most devices, I believe the stat is, don't quote me on it, but close to 60%. You're going to be able to reach by RCS in the near future if you've got an international audience. And then travel, sorry, very quickly. Yeah, a lot of really interesting implementations. One of the best ways for travel, you can think about onboarding somebody. And again, this is part chatbot, part RCS, but to have quick replies and to allow people to pick essentially multiple choice. When are you looking to travel? Are you traveling with a child? Answering questions very quickly through an RCS interface can allow somebody to book airline tickets a lot faster, or get information on their miles. So those are a few implementations I've seen.
And that's such a great example too, because not only are you servicing the customer, but you're also getting more information about who they are that you can then use to inform future communication. So I love that. We have time for one final question, and I'm going to make this rapid fire just because we are kind of running short on time, but I wanted to squeeze this one in. It comes from Kayla, who's in NYC. And she says, can you talk more about customer engagement strategies, specifically in email and SMS messaging, and how they can complement one another? I mentioned before, getting all those channels to work in concert. So that's a big piece here. So if each of you can just share one tip on how to best align email and SMS to really make sure that they're working together, that'd be great.
I don't mind
Start
taking
with
that one
Alex.
first. Yeah, 100%. So I think that the first one is just recognizing that they're different mediums with very, very different benefits. I think SMS it's short, it's punchy, it's very much a call to action. Whereas in email, you have the chance to deliver more information. It's a longer format, and you also have the ability for more interactivity. So I think the examples that we're seeing really well are where people are using SMS in conjunction with email and in conjunction with other medium, like even direct mail is a massive resurgence. And what we are seeing is people who are using these mediums sensitively are seeing that they get massive rewards when there's consistency in the message across email, SMS, or a different channel such as a digital ad or a direct mail piece. So it's looking at how to make sure that the same customer does get a consistent message across these channels, and start planning for it as one campaign rather than having your SMS team do one thing, your email team do one thing, your direct mail team do another thing. Bringing these channels together typically leads to 25 to 30% higher performance increases than planning for them as separate channels. And again, that's something we'll expand upon at the Emarsys Retail Revival Conference in June. But again, we're very, very proud of our heritage in cross-channel communication. But for anyone who's not using a provider who has the capability to do both, at least have your team's plan on having the content and the call to action be consistent across email and SMS to make sure that the customer's on board and gets the most value from it.
Yeah, orchestration is key. And Jeremy, from you, anything to add?
Yeah, I actually wrote some reports on this somewhat recently, so I'm glad you asked this, Kayla. I mean, in short, you've got the opportunity to reinforce messages from one channel to the other. Everything Alex said is completely right. They are different, so you have to really understand the nuances of each channel. I think another key thing is that now brands have the ability to figure out somebody's not looking at their emails, but they are engaging with the SMS. So is that somebody who we want to send less emails to, and then change the cadence of our SMS messaging accordingly. So really to look mindfully and to see, and Alex mentioned direct mail, really how do all of these channels interact, and then reinforce a message so that when somebody's seeing something and it's reinforced across channels, there's a lot more uptick in terms of brand engagement. And that's really one of the things that we're all ultimately looking for. So I would say really to use them in concert to reinforce messages is key.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad we squeezed that one in under the wire. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. A big thanks to Jeremy for joining us. A special thanks to Alex, the entire team at Emarsys. Thanks so much for being our sponsor today. And of course, the unsung heroes, our eMarketer production crew, who do so much behind the scenes to make this happen. They deserve a huge thank you for all the work they do, making us look good. And as promised, we'll be emailing you soon. You'll have that link to view the slides, the full recording, all the great data that we shared today. And before we wrap up, let me give you a sense of what's happening across eMarketer's media channels. As you know, we're creating a lot of research. So you could register for upcoming live analyst and tech talk webinars at eMarketer.com/webinars. On the audio side, don't forget to tune in to Behind the Numbers. Jeremy and I are frequent guests on the show. You can do that at eMarketer.com/podcast. And lastly, we have newsletters. sign up for them. Thanks so much for joining us and enjoy the rest of your workday.